my wife, I would say my better half, but it's like my better 3/4 to 7/8. Lindsay is on the stage here with me this morning. Can we all give her a round of applause? Awesome. And thanks, staff. We'll talk tomorrow at staff meeting about some of those thoughts, especially Chris. I want to be young. Like, I just am, Not young, anyways. So we're in a series about relationships. Pivot. We're in a series about relationships, and what we wanted to do in this series is kind of pose the question, are you the one? And not are you the one that I'm looking for, but are you the one that they are looking for? And we think that God's design in a lot of ways is that we would enjoy one another relationally, and one of the ways that expresses itself is through marriage and romantic relationships. That's one of the biggest and most poignant primary drivers of satisfaction and happiness in life. For those of you who are married or who are going towards that, and that doesn't mean if you're not married, you can't also have enjoyment and satisfaction, but for many of us who are going to walk down the aisle someday, or for those of you who already have walked down the aisle, you're going to walk down the aisle and you're going to say, I do, and the person that you I do with and who you are in that covenant is going to drive a ton of success in happiness in life. And so the question isn't necessarily, are you the one I'm looking for? It's, are you the one they're looking for? The Bible says a whole lot about who to be and not nearly as much about who to find. But if we are being that person and becoming that person, then we're probably going to attract and to find that person. So I'm happy to have Lindsay on stage with me to talk about some of this stuff. And today we're going to talk specifically about past and things like that, how our past manifests itself in our present and goes towards our future. Before we kind of dive into that, the reason I wanted Lindsay specifically on the stage with me today isn't just because you're my wife, and I think you're wonderful and awesome and beautiful and a lot of things, but it's because Lindsay's a therapist. She owns her own small business as a therapy private practice. She's got multiple master's degrees, one in, well, you got a licensure in, you're a licensed mental health counselor, a board-certified behavior analyst, a ADHD specialist, and I think you got that one because of me, and then a registered art therapist. Am I missing anyone? All right, so she's got we put it on the screen, it's like 17 letters after our last names in accreditation. But Lindsay, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about how you got interested in therapy?
Okay, I'm Lindsay. As I said in the first service, I love that the sanctuary is so well lit. Really helps with the nerves. I can see everyone at your faces. It's great, thanks.
You're like, oh, fourth row, I see you falling asleep.
Right.
Okay.
So I'm from Tennessee. I grew up in Knoxville. It's really odd.
Only 10 I see.
And that's it for the day. So.
And let's pray.
Grew up in Knoxville, went to school in Chattanooga at a small school called Covenant College, and then came down here to get my master's. Was going to go back to Chattanooga, and then I agreed to go on a blind date.
What was his name?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
And 13 years later, I'm still here. I got into therapy. I took a semester off my junior year of college and lived in Australia. And while I was there, I became friends with a girl who had been hospitalized, and she did art therapy in the hospital. And so she and I did painting and talking together, and I thought, well, this is pretty cool. I think I could do this for my life. So came here for grad school.
And here we are.
Here we are.
Like I said, literally, here we are right now. Yeah.
Right.
So the thing that we want to talk about today basically is the past. And the reason I want to talk about the past is because whether we acknowledge it or not, our past, and we're going to put some kind of parameters to what we mean by that. Our past is present in our current, or it's present now, and it goes into our future. And a lot of times that's okay because some of the things that happen in the past are awesome, they're incredible, but oftentimes too, the past can be very difficult to wrestle with, to deal with. And I want to, before we get into this, say a couple things. Number one is that we said earlier in the series that today we were going to have Lindsay and I, and then tonight at the 8 o'clock we're going to have a Q&A. And so you can text, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but you can text your questions to some number, but you can find that out online on Instagram. Yeah, you guys are like, man, this is well put together so far. But what I'm really excited about, in addition to just doing a Q&A and just any questions you got, any thoughts you got, relationships, we're an open book, is that it was going to be Lindsay and I, and Allie was going to be the one asking the questions. We're in a text group in a friendship with the pastor at Engaged Church, Adrian Crawford, and his wonderful wife, Wendy. His wonderful, yeah, we didn't tell you. This is why we don't do this. Okay. So Wendy Crawford, Adrian Crawford, Lindsay, and I are all going to be here at 8 o'clock tonight answering any questions you got. And so we're going to be live streaming it as well. If you can't make it, that's fine. You can pull it up online and check it out there. But excited about that tonight. So back to the sermon or whatever, conversation. And we want to say this isn't like a sermon. This is a conversation that we're going to have that I want to create a little bit of a biblical framework for how we view the rest of what we're going to talk about today. Because when we talk about the past, it is absolutely present today. But I think it's important that we understand that, acknowledge it, and figure out how to move on from it. And the reason I say that is Paul in Philippians 3 had just gone through his incredible past spiritual resume, right? He said these are all the things of the tribe of Benjamin, as zeal, a Pharisee, and he would go on and say, here's all of my past accreditations and accolades. And he says, man, but all of it is worthless compared to knowing Jesus. All of it is worthless compared to knowing Jesus. He says, man, I want to know Christ. I want to know him. I want to share in his victories. I want to share in his pain and his suffering so that I might attain, the resurrection of the dead. And so he's saying, man, I want to know Jesus really well. And he says this really insightful thing in verse 12 and 13. This is Paul speaking. He says, not that I have already obtained all this or have already arrived at my goal. In other words, I'm not there. I'm not perfect. I'm not where I want to be yet. But I press on to take hold of that which Christ Jesus took hold of me. So I'm pressing on towards it. He repeats in verse 13, brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself to have yet taken hold of it, but the one thing I do, and I would pause there. It says the one thing I do. This is like Michael Jordan saying, before I go into a game, this is the one thing that I focus on. Think of whoever is at the apex of whatever your place or your industry or your sport or whatever it is. He says, this is the one thing I do. Forgetting what is behind, straining towards what is ahead, I press to the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. So he says, the one thing I do is I let go of the past to actualize the potential of God's call for me on the future. In other words, our greatest or one of our greatest hurdles to who God has called us to be is who we were and what we've experienced. And so Paul says, man, I have to forget that in order to move on to what God has called me to and who God's called me to be. And the importance of that is to say that assumes that we actually remember the things that have been hurtful to us and for us, that we actually have dealt with those things and that we're able to let go of them. And so all of this kind of comes under the framework of what Paul's arguing here. If I'm going to be who God has called me to be, I have to let go of what has happened and who I was in the past. And that's a really, really difficult thing to do, which is why we have wonderful therapists. So kind of launching into that thought and that conversation, Lindsay, for you, what would you say, what's the starting point for understanding our past and how it influences who we are?
Well, thank you, Ben.
You're welcome, Lindsay.
All right, well, so I think, we all know that we have a past, right? Like, that's a given.
Like, what?
I know, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have a master's in this, I know. So, yeah, we all know that we have a past, and I think it's theoretically, yes, I have a past. I know what to do. And I think with the bigger things, we can always say, like, oh, yeah, like my past, like that bad relationship totally influenced me. But there's a lot of smaller things within our past, or even deep-rooted things within our past that we don't always necessarily realize are shaping who we are, or what we're doing, or decisions that we're making, or even the people that we're dating. So
what's an example of that, just like an easy, accessible example of that? You were, I think, in some ways making fun of me and also illuminating me to this idea through the lens of FSU football.
Yes. So past, like, if you grow up liking FSU football.
Positive.
Then you are going to probably go to Florida State.
Also positive. 2 and 4. Okay, I got you. Yeah.
And you're probably going to grow up liking football because that was what your past did. It's what your past told you to do.
Right. So what's interesting about this is, so we would all acknowledge this. There's a positive and a negative past, right? And there's ways that we know, man, I had this really big, significant thing happen. Trust was violated, and so now I have a difficult time trust. So that is there, but I think there are a lot of kind of covert ways that we don't make that connection. It's not as linear as we would necessarily think it would be. And one of the ways that I've found, and we've talked about this before, is intention of the offender. I want you to imagine that our past is like a car door, right? So one person backs into your door and says, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. There's somebody who loves you, There's somebody who cares about you. There's somebody who actually wants the best for you. But for whatever reason, something happened. It was a mistake. They didn't mean to, or, bad judgment, whatever it was. But they backed into your door. Now you've got a second person who maybe backs into the door, and they hate you, right? They actually want what's worst for you or for me. And so they back into your door, and they peel out, and they're, cussing you out as they drive away and flicking you a half a peace sign, and they're doing all this stuff, and you want to obviously punch them in the throat to keep continuity's sake, right? So what's interesting about that is what we will do is the person who we know had a poor intent, we acknowledge that as a dent, but the person who meant well, we almost pretend like the hurt isn't there because their intentions weren't bad, right? But good intentions don't fix dented doors. But we can look at it and say, I know they didn't mean to. I know that wasn't on purpose. I know that wasn't intentional, but yet there is a dent there. So under that thought, what other things can you think of that are perhaps ways that we have dented doors that we don't realize or acknowledge?
Well, I think one of them is like assuming that your dent is normal, right? So everybody has this dent. Like, doesn't everybody struggle with this? I think another one is just kind of ignoring the dents or saying like, yeah, like I have dents, but you have dents. Your dents are worse. So I think even picking out other people's dents rather than looking at ours. So I think those are a couple of the ways that we can do that. Or even just saying like, well, yes, this dent is here, but I'm going to look at these other dents first. They're easier to look at. So.
I've heard married people blame other people's dents on other people.
I've heard that too, but not us.
Yeah, not us. We have a great marriage. So now, just for the sake of dents, right? It doesn't feel that substantive or significant. But when you were unpacking this to me, I thought it was really insightful what you were saying about how it doesn't just stop there. It's not just, oh, I had something happen. Here's a dent. It actually forms something deeper inside of us. Would you explain what that is and how that works?
Sure. So a lot of what I work on with therapy or in therapy with clients is kind of this idea of a core belief. So something has happened in the past and it's shaped who you are, how you view yourself, or how you view the world, but it's kind of like wearing glasses where we don't necessarily realize that this is how we are filtering information. So we have these beliefs that are shaping everything about what we do, but we don't know that they're there. So we call those core beliefs.
Nice. Can you give me an example of a core belief that you would have seen work out? Or not work out, but that you've seen kind of as you have talked with folks?
Yeah. So one that I've seen a lot is like stability, right? Is there's comfort in stability. So or comfort in control. So you might have grown up with a parent or a family member who is emotionally or maybe physically volatile, and so you are striving for control in what you can control in the areas because when you don't have control, that's not safe. And so we are looking for ways that we can control things like weight or our schedule or finances or even our children. So the typical helicopter parent, they're trying to control their children because when we can't control things, then it equals negative or we're out of control or something like that.
Yeah, which I'm sure no one's experienced a controlling parent in here. So that's good. One of the things I think about that, too, that just even taking that thought, I think one of the things that can happen is growing up in a volatile environment, sometimes we cannot know how to operate outside of volatility, outside of chaos, right? And so it's almost like chaos is comfort in some senses, so we can kind of create our own pathways towards that. And one of the things I want to kind of pause here on, because I want you to unpack a couple more, but before you do, I want to give here's what I love about the Bible. The Bible speaks directly to this, right? And it's a principle that's in Romans. And I love it because there's oftentimes been this, separation between Jesus, Christianity, spirituality, and good mental health. And essentially what we're saying here is what Paul is actually arguing in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, where he talks, and he has just in chapters 1 through 11 given this, really, honestly, complex and fascinating unpacking of what the gospel is, who Jesus is, how salvation works. And he goes in chapter 12, verse 2, after he said, okay, so in view of all of that, present your bodies as living sacrifices. Now, 12:2, do not conform to the patterns of this world. So don't conform to the world around you. But, he says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. In other words, life transformation happens as our minds become renewed to the truth of who Jesus is. And so basically what you're saying in that is that we all have experiences those experiences have formed us at a more kind of deep, almost subconscious level sometimes, right? Because it's not very like clear in terms of its linear connection and relationship. And so what happens as a result of that is Paul saying, hey, life transformation happens as you change your beliefs. Life transformation changes as your mind becomes renewed. So as your mind becomes renewed, as we take those places of brokenness, understand the brokenness, and hold them to truth, what actually happens is we see our lives become transformed as a result of that. And so if you're like thinking about this, then this is again Paul's argument. Transformation happens when beliefs change. As my beliefs change, my life becomes transformed because I'm operating out of a different lens that we view. So can you give us some more, because I think that's super helpful. Can you give us some more examples of how you have seen/experienced core beliefs, how they were formed, what they are, and how they now manifest themselves in the present?
Yeah. So another one is maybe I'm not worthy of love. So dad left the house at a young age, and so you believe that it's your fault or that you don't deserve that love. And so how that could play out is you volunteer to do everything at work, right? Either you're striving for some recognition to feel value, or you're willing to kind of date the next warm body that comes into contact with you because you don't really deserve love, so we're just going to settle and date this person, even though they're not a great person. Another one is...
Hold on, say that last line one more time. I just feel like that. I mean, this is so helpful for relationships, right? Because we all just like, oh, I choose this person. I like this person, right? We don't realize that, like, okay, there's something deeper that's making you cling to the first person that you see. So say that one more time.
So if you don't love yourself, then you probably are willing to settle for just anybody that comes across that pretends or shows love to you. Because if you don't value yourself, then you're going to accept just kind of whoever is willing to be there.
And I want to make a point real quick, because some of you will probably think, well, I don't agree because we're brokenness, and so loving myself doesn't seem like, it seems very self-helpy, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't love yourself, then what you're saying is that you find yourself less lovable than Jesus does. That your standard for lovableness is higher than Jesus. Interestingly, it's actually a sense of pride and arrogance, and not in a way, in almost a reciprocal way, but what you're saying is functionally, my standard for love and sacrifice and value is higher than Jesus, because we determine value by the price someone's willing to pay. If God was willing to pay his own son Jesus for us, how valuable are we? And so it's not necessarily I have this overinflated view of myself, it's that I actually understand the value that I have in Christ. So I just wanted to say that real quick, because I think that's something that a lot of us deal with and struggle with. So go on, because you've got some zingers.
Okay.
This probably shouldn't say zingers, but yeah, you know.
Another one is, if I'm not perfect, I'm a failure. So I have to get an A. I can't get a B, right? It's okay for you to get a B, but I can't get a B. Or I can't make any sort of mistake, because there's no gray. It's black and white. So if I am not perfect, then I am a failure. The other one is, or another one, there's many. Another one is, it's my fault, right? So you maybe were taught at a young age that whatever happens, this is your fault. And so any type of conflict in a relationship, or any type of perceived conflict or distress in somebody, it's going to evoke this feeling of this is my fault. I'm not wanted here because I'm in the wrong. So those are some of the core beliefs that you may not necessarily realize. We don't have a conscious thought of, this is my fault, or I'm a failure if I'm not perfect. But it is going to filter up and influence how we view ourselves and how we view the world.
And I think that's a difficult part, right, is it's not so linear. It's not like, oh, because of this. And I'd also say that it's not just, we've used the example of kind of like upbringing, but some of us, we've been in relationships where consistently for years, every conflict was our fault, right? And whether we acknowledge it or not, that is something that left unexposed, that left kind of to just bury deep down, we think isn't going to follow us because I've moved on to a new person. But the power of this is, I think, so significant, because our decision, or our beliefs, what we believe to be true, what we believe about ourselves, they're below the surface, but they inform our decisions. Our decisions create the outcomes or the actions of our lives. And I think what happens in the midst of this is, so we try to make different decisions, but the decisions are based on the same belief, and so we experience the same outcomes, and we don't know what's wrong. So let me give you an example. You said the person who doesn't feel like they're worthy of love, and so they attach themselves to the first person who shows them love, right? So they continually date someone who's a jerk. Girl jerk, guy jerk, whatever. Everybody can be a jerk. So they attach themselves to the first person, and they realize, man, I'm continually finding this person. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong place. And so instead of, looking for this person at the bar, which I don't even know anybody does anymore. You guys find people on apps, right? So instead of like swiping whatever way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go look for them at church. Let me tell you, there are jerks at church, right? Some of y'all saw them in the parking lot as they stole your spot, right? Just because they go to church doesn't mean they're a good person. And so I would say, so you still find that same person, but you think, okay, here's a different decision I'm making. Perhaps it'll create a different outcome, but it's on the same belief. And if we don't vet those beliefs and hold them to truth, then it is inevitably going to create the same types of outcomes to the same types of decisions.
Yeah, I'm going to add too. I think that we continually make decisions in order to fill our core beliefs up. So I'm going to continually go above and beyond at my job because I need to continue to make decisions to make myself feel better rather than addressing the dent.
Yeah, no, I love that. So in this same kind of thought and framework, essentially what we're saying is this, that we have to be able to, and this is what Jesus does, by the way, take brokenness and expose it to light and expose it to truth to make it whole, right? We're going to take brokenness and we're going to expose it to light. We're going to take it captive to Christ, expose it to truth, and that's going to help to make us whole. So if that's the case, and the difficulty, let me kind of pose a problem to you. If our core beliefs have been impacted by our past, and they're manifesting itself in our current, and it will continue into the future, but core beliefs by nature are difficult to identify. What's the starting point for beginning to identify what those core beliefs are? Like how do we even see it?
Yeah, I think the first thing is like recognizing triggers. So triggers are going to create an exaggerated response in ourselves that may not necessarily fit the situation. So grades example, right, is like, it's okay for you to get a B, but when I get a B, the whole world is falling apart, and I'm the worst person in the world. Or I need to do better next time. I should have done better next time. I should have studied that extra hour when I was falling asleep anyways. Or another one is holding ourselves to standards that we wouldn't hold other people. So it's okay for you to do this, but it is not okay for me to do this. Or it's okay, like, you need to break up with this guy because he's horrible, but my guy's working on it.
No,
right?
he's not.
He's
working on it because
not.
he's scared that he's losing
not.
you, and when the impending
he has
threat.
dents in his door, he's not looking at either. But so I think it's this difference of I'm going to show you more grace, or I'm going to have a different expectation for you, but it's not okay for me to have that same thing.
Yeah, no, that's good, and I think there's a lot that's powerful in that, and I think that in essence, what you're saying is that understanding triggers being defined as a disproportionate reaction to a standard stimulus, right? Mm-hmm. That creates kind of a window into what that is. There's something else that you talked about in the avenue of shame, and how shame plays into triggers and can help to kind of identify what those are. Talk about that a little bit.
So everyone's favorite topic is shame. I know that you've all had a good morning breakfast conversation about shame in your life.
This is the 11. They've had coffee. They're good to go, man.
Okay, well, so you'll have shame at lunch.
Yeah.
So guilt and shame, right? Guilt is I've done something bad. Shame is I am bad. And so we can feel shame when our core beliefs are kind of brought more up to light, or when we feel like we have not met our expectations.
Yeah, no, that's. I feel like we just all need to pause there for a second. No, that's really helpful and insightful. What's up?
Do you want me to give you an example or something? Or?
Yeah, if you got more, that'd be awesome.
Okay, well, maybe, so if your shame or your core belief is I'm wrong, like it's always my fault. When you actually do get into a fight with your partner, you're going to feel immense shame because it may not be anything that you did. You may not be at fault or guilty at all, but you are going to feel that overwhelming sense of guilt, which is really shame, because you just don't believe that things cannot be your fault, or you don't believe that you're a good person.
Yeah, that's good. And I would say with this too, the idea is, right, triggers begin to expose those, and there's lots of things that can be, triggering. And for us, we kind of a funny example. Well, I don't know if it's funny. It was funny to me. A normal family knows that yelling at the dinner table means people are angry and we ought not do that, right? For us, we call it intellectual sparring, which some of us think of as debate, right? So this is about a year or so ago, and my dad and I, we love to do that kind of stuff, and that was kind of the family I was raised in. And so we were at my dad's birthday dinner. We were at the house, right, but my dad's birthday dinner, and I don't even remember the exact nuances of what we were arguing about. I remember the subject, but neither one of us actually cared about what we were arguing for so much as we just enjoyed the process of arguing. And in our family, whoever's loudest is usually whoever's right. Core belief, not an accurate one, but a core belief. And so we started having an intellectual sparring match that over the course of about a minute started to get a little bit loud. And over the process of the next 5 minutes, stayed at peak volume level as everyone else left the room.
We cleared the table. We turned the lights off on them.
They literally turned the lights off.
Yeah, we literally turned the lights off.
And they thought that was going to send us a signal. And we were like, no, we know this signal, but I'm trying to win, right? That's what I'm doing. So we got done, and we were just having a good time. We were like, it's fun. So we're joking afterwards and hugging. We walked in the living room, and I can't tell you the looks that we got from Lindsay and Susan, my stepmom. We were not popular for the next week or so. And it's because right, for our family that was normal, but for the typical person, right, that is not, and that means somebody's mad, somebody's angry, and it's happening at an inappropriate time. And so I say that to say a lot of this stuff can happen in different ways, and some of them are less deep, and some of them are really kind of existentially deep. But this is an application point. And I actually got this from Live the Life, so thanks. Richard, who's the founder and CEO of executive director and president and all that kind of stuff, and Elizabeth, who I don't know how you put up with Richard, but love believes all things, I think, hopes all things. Gosh, they have this exercise, and I thought this was a great starting point. So I would say for everybody here, and this is frankly no matter where you are in terms of your relational status, they call it the family tree. And so you draw a tree, and you have a group of leaves that are on the tree and a group of leaves that are on the ground. And the group of leaves that are on the tree are all the things that happened in your family or in previous relationships that you want to bring into this relationship or that you would like to do in this relationship. So it might be, I want us to have family dinner. It might be one of the things I loved about my family is how everybody got an opportunity to talk at the dinner table. The thing I love about my family is my parents were always present at my games, and I want to do that. And then the second, the leaves on the ground are all the things that you want to leave behind. So, Dad always interrupted Mom. Dad and son always yelled at the dinner table and thought it was normal, right? So here's the things that I want to leave behind, and here's why that's important. The things that you want to leave behind are almost always going to be triggers for you. And one family comes from a background where interrupting each other was normal. And another person comes from a background where interrupting the other person made the person feel devalued and the same person was always right? Well, when two people come into marriage, what happens inevitably is we bring those backgrounds and those contexts, which is why it's so easy, because now I assume the negative narrative because my entire existence has assumed when I get cut off, I am devalued. The other person thinks when I cut you off, I'm having fun, right? Now, neither person are intentionally being disrespectful, but that's how it comes across because of our past. And so I would say, if you honestly don't do much else, we deserve it to know of ourselves and about ourselves. And so making that tree, whether you want to draw it or whether you just do a list form, the things I want to bring into it, these are the things I value, the things that I don't want to bring into it, and those are usually going to be triggers. Would you generally agree with that?
I would agree. And I also thought of one thing. Another way to kind of identify what a core belief is when you have Snapchat. I did this in the first service. Delete it. It's the worst thing in the world. Because what it does is it gives you enough information that then you fill in the gaps with your own narrative, and your own narrative is probably going to be your core belief. So when you see that this person is active, has left you in red, you can look at their location, but that's all you know. It's going to be, he's cheated on me, or she doesn't like me anymore, or whatever. And so when you have bits of information, and then you become anxious with what you think is happening, that could be a core belief.
So let me ask you this then, because I think there's one more step to this, which is that as triggers, get to the core belief, I think it's important to kind of vet what is that core belief. So I acknowledge, man, I had a really strong reaction to this. Or my therapist tells me I had a really strong reaction. Or my friend tells me I had a really strong reaction to this. Acknowledging that that's a trigger doesn't necessarily inform the core belief. So how do you get below the surface of the trigger? Once you've acknowledged, man, I don't know why that thing triggered me, what would you suggest to do next?
One thing I do with my clients is we do it, it's called an iceberg. So above the surface, right, the ice that you can see, that's the feeling that we can first acknowledge. So anger, anxiety, sadness. I mean, you can see that. So you know that that's a thing. But then we look at what's underneath that. So I'm feeling angry. We're like, why are you angry? Well, I made this mistake. So, what's below that? Well, maybe it's disappointment in myself. What's below that? Well, I feel like I should have been able to do this. So at the base of that is this standard of perfectionism that I should have done this. I'm disappointed in myself, and now I'm angry. But all I see is the anger. Another thing you can do, it's similar, is just ask why until you run out of whys. So why haven't you broken up with this person yet? Well, I don't want to be alone. Well, why don't you want to be alone? Well, I'm afraid that if I break up with him or her, no one will ever want to date me and I'll be alone the rest of my life. Well, why do you think that? Well, because I don't really value myself as a person, so why would anybody else? So there's the whys, and you ask yourself that until you just can't ask yourself anymore, and that could be one of your core beliefs then, or helping you at least find that.
Yeah, that's
and if
good.
you can't find it, your friends will help you. So.
Or your spouse.
Or your spouse. Or your therapist.
Yeah. Well, no, so I actually think that's incredibly helpful because, so I'd say this, so that is extremely helpful in the context of relationships, but just in general, right? We always ascribe a positive or a negative to the things that we do, but rarely take a very neutral form of this and say, but why, right? So one of the things I found, this actually helps me a lot in business. So if you guys don't know, I run our family's company. It's called Register Sausage. You should eat it. It's like Chick-fil-A and Register Sausage. We're like vying for God's meat. It's title, but so I'll have a call with a buyer about trying to get into an opportunity or a warehouse or something like a distribution center. And there'll be a lot of stores that's on the line with this conversation. I'll find myself procrastinating about it. And I started, instead of saying, man, I really should call, I started asking myself, why don't I call? And what I've kind of uncovered, and this isn't all the time, is it's not the fear of failure, but the allure of possibility for me is stronger than the clarity of definitiveness. And I love possibility. I love potential. And so what I start to do is I start to just procrastinate on actually taking a step forward because, at the core of it, man, I love potential and upside potential.
Well, and the key too is to ask yourself why with compassion and curiosity, not judgment. Because if you go into this with judgment, you're never going to actually be able and willing to explore what's going on. So if it's, why am I angry? Or why can I never do this? Or why can I never find somebody? That is a very judgmental tone towards yourself. And then you're not going to actually find the root of it. You have to approach yourself just non-judgmentally. What's going on? I'm curious. Why am I feeling this way?
Yeah, no, that's good. And I think that gets back to I choose bad things, not I am a bad person, right? I mean, fundamentally, we're all bad people because we're all broken people, and it is what it is. But there's nothing uniquely bad that makes me more bad subjective to your bad. It's just a different decision of bad, and I'm trying to figure out why that is.
Yes.
Cool. So I want to ask you in a second what we now do with this when we have kind of gotten to the bottom of it. But I want to pause here for a second and kind of insert one more thought about the overlay of spirituality in this. I found myself asking at times, why is this important? I operate as a human being well, I hope. Do you agree? Okay, yeah. So why, kind of to dig up all this stuff. And here's what I find to be the reality. We said this a minute ago, but that what we're doing is we're taking brokenness, again, exposing it to truth, taking it captive to Christ and say, what would Jesus say about this? What's the truth in this? What is the reality of this core belief that I've felt? And the importance of that is as long as you might still choose the same thing. So let's say it's control, right? And you choose to be controlling versus not controlling. Here's the point. Until you have the ability to, in the moment, understand it, and in the moment, acknowledge it, and you have the ability to not act out of it, you are actually enslaved to it. Let me say that again. Until you have the ability to see it, acknowledge it, and do something about it, and choose differently, as long as you could think about, Basically, enslavement says you can only do this is the only thing that you can do, is the only choice that you can make. Until you have the ability to choose something different on purpose and understand where that's coming from, you are enslaved to it, which is why I say we hold it to truth, because I don't know if you guys know this, but there's this dude named Jesus in John chapter 8. He said this incredible statement that the truth will set you free. Very good. And so, if freedom comes from truth and truth exposed to a lie gives us the choice to choose, then we are actually no longer enslaved to that thing that we were enslaved to. We are now free to follow Jesus as he has called us to, letting go of the past, pressing into the future. So with that thought, you raised it up like you had, yeah, I'll give you one. So with that thought then, let's say somebody acknowledges all this, they see all of it. I see my triggers. I see the iceberg, what's happening at the below the surface and in the basement of my heart and my thoughts and my beliefs, and I see how they're creating the outcomes in my life. I see all that. I acknowledge that. I'm working through that, but that still doesn't make me have a happy marriage. So what would you say to the person who is pursuing all that? What's the application now that they have understood that?
Well, I think it's much harder than you think to actually be able to stop and acknowledge what's going on in the moment, especially when you're a high anxiety or high distress or just being triggered in general. So I think that's kind of the first thing, is just stopping and being aware of this is coming from somewhere. Where is this coming from? And then one of the things that I share with people in therapy session is your actions are going to be fueled by your emotions. So you're anxious, you're going to do something out of anxiety that's going to make you feel better, or you're upset, you are angry, you're going to do something that's going to fuel that. And so emotion and action go with opposite action, right? So I want to text this person because I don't know where they are. They haven't responded to me in an hour. I'm going to blow up their phone with 40 text messages. Mm-hmm. The opposite action is I'm going to sit with this. I'm going to just kind of evaluate this, or I really feel called to, volunteer to do something else again at work because I want to feel good about what I'm doing and I want to know what I'm doing is making a difference. I'm going to continually burn myself out by trying to go above and beyond. Opposite action, maybe I need to sit and let other people do something instead. So I would say that, just kind of evaluating that. And again, it's easy to be, write notes and be in a church service and not actually go home and look at what our core beliefs are. It's very painful to explore this, to really look at what is fueling me, how have I been hurt, what are my dents, and whether or not you're doing this in a relationship, whether you're single, it's important just as individuals to really look at what is fueling me, what are the hurts, not just the positives, but what are the negatives, what are the hurts that we all have experienced, so we can be better people.
Yeah, no, that's great. And to your point of the emotion in that dictates action and how we ought to do the opposite, right? I mean, this is something that you taught me, is that anxiety at its core is a prediction. Anxiety creates uncertainty. And so what we do with uncertainty and the predictions that we cause is anxiety always causes us to speed things up, right? So I'm anxious about this, it's uncertain, so I'm going to send you 1,000 text messages. When what I really ought to do is sit with that, understand the thing I'm projecting in that, because if I'm speeding up, it resolves the uncertainty more quickly, or that's what it feels like. We're looking for that resolution, but that's not always the healthiest thing to do. Maybe it is, but until you have the opportunity to not choose that.
It's typically not.
Yeah. Let's just say that for safety. Okay. So here's kind of the whole formula of this thing. It's that our dents and our dings inform our core beliefs that are below the surface. The core beliefs that are below the surface, and please hear me clearly on this. It's not if they will, it's how they will. They absolutely impact the way that you see the world and the way that I see the world. They absolutely do and will impact your current relationships, your future relationships, your marriage. They absolutely will impact how you parent your children when they are 3 years old, 13 years old, and 30 years old. Your unresolved past, your unresolved dents, create something deep inside of us that we begin to operate out of, and it's incredibly difficult to see it. But doing the difficult work is so incredibly important, because when we expose that brokenness again to truth, it brings a sense of health and wholeness. And I just kind of end with this. This is just kind of my advice. Being aware of it is helpful. Being able to label it in the moment is more helpful. Being able to communicate it in advance to the person that you're close with is most helpful. Because that one brings awareness to them, but it also tells them, hey, this is an area of sensitivity to me. Please be conscious of it. Please be conscious of it. And if they ever use that against you, and you're dating, then that's what we call gaslighting. That is them taking something that's triggering for you and using it against you to control you, and you should end that relationship immediately. Can you imagine being with that for the next 45 to 50 years? That is called torture. So please, 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 and if you're doing that, I will punch you in the throat if you're married. I just want you to know that, right? Seriously. I cannot imagine being married to you, so please stop. That's just terribly toxic, unhealthy. And anyways, pray for me after the service. I'm feeling like my debate to my dad. I'm like, all right, come on.
Deep breath, deep
breath. Yeah. Label it. No, but here's why we say all this, because, man, I want everybody in here to have incredible relationships. I want you to operate from a place of health. I want us to understand our brokenness, understand that we all are broken, but understand that Jesus is the one that makes us and brings us whole. That when God so loved the world, he sent his son, Jesus, to planet Earth to die for each and every one of us. And the reality is that we now live for him, pressing into who he's called us to be. We let go of the past, but in order to let go of it, we understand how it hasn't let go of us yet. And so as we do this difficult work, I would say maybe your homework is to go and make the family tree. Maybe your homework is to go and ask a friend, where have you seen me give a significant reaction to a normal stimulus? Or perhaps it's to say, hey, I'm just not aware of it, and so tomorrow I'm going to call a therapist to help me sift through this, because I can't tell you how much this has impacted us. I'm so thankful that actually we met later in life so that we were able to be a little bit more self-aware of who we are, where we are, how we were formed, and those difficulties for us. So when we're bringing it to a relationship, we're bringing in more of a sense of wholeness and health than operating out of deficiency. So anyways, man, she's awesome. Can you give her a round of applause? All right, let's pray together. Jesus, thank you so much for this time that we have. I pray that we would forget what's behind us, but we would forget it in a way that's consciously aware. God, so many of us suffer from what Carl Jung said when he said that our subconscious, the unconscious, until we make our unconscious conscious, it will drive our lives and we'll call it fate. We all do what we do because of something, positive and negative. Would you help us to do the difficult work in order to forget the past, we have to remember and understand the past in a way that we can let go of it and it can let go of its grip on us. That we can press in to be the people who you have called us to be. We can understand how our hurts cause beliefs, how our beliefs inform our decisions, and how our decisions create our reality. Would you give us the wisdom to take one of these ideas, family tree, an iceberg, a why, a friend, a therapist, whoever it is, would you give us the wisdom and the courage to see it, to sit through the uncomfortableness of it, to sometimes when we might try to devalue and say the pointlessness of it. But would you give us the wisdom to know what to do, and then the courage to actually do it? Jesus, you died to set us free from the weight of sin and shame, that we would have eternity with you. God, you are the God who takes brokenness, you expose it to light and truth to bring wholeness. I pray that would happen for each and every person in here today, that we would be more whole, our relationships would be more whole, our friendships would be more whole, our parental looking towards kids and our kids looking towards our parents would be more whole. As we take our brokenness, expose it to truth, we understand how our beliefs inform our decisions, and that we would be more like you, Jesus. Would you give us the wisdom to know what to do and the courage to do the difficult work, to actually do it? And it's in your name we pray. Amen.